My name is Laura de Jong, and I just graduated from seminary actually in May, and so I'm transitioning into becoming the pastor of a church in Michigan that'll start this fall. So that's kind of the formal job, but I've been leading worship for the last 8 years, somewhat professionally. So that's something I love to do, but am kind of transitioning into more of a preaching ministry currently. I think one of the things I valued most about being a worship leader with other college students was that we were peers. And so there wasn't that automatic power dynamic when you're working with someone that's older than you are. So I had to come in as as kind of the leader of my worship team and somehow figure out how to have some semblance of authority without being really cocky and arrogant, and also to rely on other people. So you learned really quickly that leadership relied on humility and teamwork and asking other people for their opinions and what they wanted to do with a song rather than just what I would want to do with it. So I think that set me up really well for then when I was a seminarian, coming in and leading with people who were maybe 4 or 5, 6 years younger than I was, to still rely on that same amount of humility and teamwork, and to make it a real collaborative effort rather than just, I'm going to run this show, y'all better do what I want you to do. So that was an important part of my leadership development, I think, was coming in and leading with peers rather than right away leading people who were younger than I was. So I think one of the things that I love most about worship, one of the things that forms how I think about worship, is storytelling. That's something that I've grown to love in general, and thinking through how that relates to worship, I see worship as a narrative, right? Every service is telling a story. It's telling the story of God's relationship with his people. And so you move through all the different parts of a service, right? You get called into his presence, and then, there's this dialogue of praise and this feeling of, oh my goodness, what are we doing? The language of I'm sorry, hearing this assurance. You're just moving through this story of redemption. It's the story of Scripture, but it gets played out essentially every Sunday or whenever you worship. And that in turn, I think, then allows you to leave the worship service and say, how do I live into that story throughout the week? How do I go about my day being welcomed into God's presence and feeling my own sin and lack of deserving any kind of grace, and then receiving that grace? And so throughout the week, if worship is a story, it extends to the week, which I really love. So that helps me think through when I'm planning a worship service. How do I plan it? What's the structure of it? What elements need to be there to tell that story? And I think it helps me worship better, and then also informs the rest of my week as worship, as living into that story. So that's been something that I've grown to really appreciate, and I think has kind of underpinned a lot of my work. So one of the ways we can create this sense of integration between the work week and Sunday morning is to help people be more vulnerable in worship. Because I think there's a sense of, I'm going to leave everything from Monday to Saturday at the door when I go into church. And that's when I have to put on this face of having everything together and do the happy clappy, praise Jesus thing. So I think one of the ways we integrate life, because life is not all happy clappy all the time. You go through all of the emotions every day. And so if we as worship leaders and pastors can create spaces within a worship service that allow people to lament, to cry, to be angry, to be joyful and to praise, and to do that authentically. So having times of lament, having these times of confession, going through some of the more difficult Psalms that we're not quite sure what to do with because they're really angry and aggressive, and saying, that's okay. That is still dialogue with God, and he still welcomes that. I think that would allow people to worship more fully with themselves. Right, there's this language of ashes, tears, and trumpets, and being able to bring all of that, all of who you are, into worship. So that the flip side of that is then you can go into your work week, and because you've experienced all of yourself in worship, you can also experience all of who God is during your week, right? That God cares. I've been told on Sunday that God cares about my tears. I've been given that space. And so when I experience something during the week, it's not as much of a disconnect for me then to think, yeah, God cares about this. And hopefully that allows people to experience God's presence maybe in a more vibrant way during the week.